This video introduces the ForEachLoop, which is a version of the for loop that's more abstract, and it's something that you should use whenever you can instead of an ordinary for loop. It's most useful when you're dealing with data in things like arrays and array lists. So what we're going to do is we're going to, in this program here, show the same kinds of operations using both a for loop and a ForEachLoop, and explain why the ForEachLoop is better. So this is something we've seen before. We got these two, an array and an array list, and then we're going to print out the array. We're going to copy the data from the array to the array list, and then we're going to print out the array list. Now we're using a for loop in each case here. One there, and one there. Now there's two things about this that we don't particularly like. The first is actually it gets into quite a lot of detail about how it works. So you've got to say things like, well, go and create a counter and start it at 0, and then while you haven't got to the end of this list of the data you're dealing with, do this, and every time round you add 1. Okay, so it's quite sort of detailed and mechanical. It's essentially telling you not what to do, but how to do it. The second thing is that actually we deal with the array and the array list differently. So this is particularly clear when we're looking at checking whether we're going to finish or not. So with arrays we have to write array data.length, where array data is the name of the array, and for the array list we're using .size instead. So we deal with them differently. Also, the way we access elements in these is different too. So when we look at an array, we're using these square brackets for reading and writing, and when we're using an array list, we're using get for reading and add or set for adding things to this. So again, it's very much the detail of how it's worked is exposed. Now, down here is the same one, only this time we're using this concept called a ForEachLoop. As you can see, it looks a bit shorter and simpler, and we're abstracting away from a whole bunch of the detail that we had before. So now what we're basically saying is this: I don't care how this works, I just want to see the result. So here we've basically got this loop syntax, which essentially says I'm going to be doing something with the data in this thing here, array data. I don't care whether this is an array or an array list, and in fact the syntax of this loop makes no difference whether this is an array or an array list. So what we have is this colon, and after the colon we've got the data we're dealing with, the array, array list, or some other kind of structure that Java has we haven't seen yet, but which is more advanced. Before the colon we've got two things. First of all, there's the type of data that this thing contains. This happens to be an array, and it happens to contain strings. And secondly, there's a name there, an identifier we make up to represent each particular element of data in this. Okay, now quite commonly we'll use lm, but we might use something else like val or whatever we want. We could change this to be whatever we want there, and it's just meant to be a meaningful name. So val, lm for element is a quite common names to choose. And then we're saying what we're going to do with those things. In this case, we're going to print them out. And what this basically says is go away and print out everything in here. I don't care whether it's an array or an array list. And in fact, if we go back down to the bottom loop here, we're doing again exactly the same thing as we did before. We're printing out, but this time we're printing out the contents not of array data but array list data. Now array list data isn't an array, it's an array list, but the syntax of this is exactly the same. The syntax of this is exactly the same. You don't have to change anything, and that's because we're not dealing with what kind of data structure is this. We're just saying I want you to do these things with this data. Now, one important advantage of this is you get away from the possible mistakes you might make with like setting this to 1 or using less than or equal to or messing this up or any of the kinds of things you could do wrong, because it's simpler. And secondly, if you, for example, start with your data in an array and then you want to move it to an array list, well, you can. You do have to do nothing here. You don't have to go back and find all your loops and change them all because now they're different. It's exactly the same. This is more abstract. It doesn't deal with the detail so much, and we always prefer that where possible. Just to show you the middle one too, this one isn't printing something out, it's adding data to the array list. So in this case we're just saying take all of the elements in this array, which are strings, represent them by the name lm while we're going around this loop, and for every single one of them go and add them to the array list data. we don't have to worry about whether this thing is an element of an array or whatever. It just goes ahead and does it. Now at the bottom of this program, which is on Blackboard, and also there's quite a lot of discussion in the notes, there's a little bit of a comment explaining the syntax of this. And what it basically is you have the for, and then in brackets after that, first of all you have the type of data you're dealing with, a name that you make up, that should just be a meaningful name, then after the colon the actual name of the data structure, array, array list, or whatever that you're using.